The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
Today's guest really needs no introduction. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie has been at the highest national levels of the Republican Party for the past 2 decades as a leader in this country. Governor Christie was born in Newark, New Jersey. He went on to get his undergraduate degree in political science from the University of Delaware, where he also served as student government president. He then went on to Seton Hall School of Law in New Jersey, earning his Juris Doctorate degree. Governor Christie was elected as a legislator, also known as a freeman in New Jersey politics, in 1995. And by 2002, he was already campaigning for President George W. Bush, who upon his election as President of the United States, appointed Governor Christie as a special federal prosecutor and a United States attorney for New Jersey. In 2009, Governor Christie won the 2009 Republican primary for governor of New Jersey, and then went on to defeat a Democratic incumbent to become the 55th governor of the state of New Jersey. As governor, he chaired the Republican Governors Association during the 2014 election cycle. In 2016, he became a candidate for President of the United States himself. He eventually threw his support behind Donald Trump in 2016. And then when Trump went on to win the presidency, he named Governor Christie the head of his transition team. Governor Christie is a regular contributor on national news broadcasts and is a special contributor to ABC News World Tonight. He is also a New York Times bestselling author, and we will be discussing his latest book, Republican Rescue, on this show. We look forward to hearing from him today on some of his ideas about the future of this country and the dilemmas we face as a nation. He has very important views on these things. He has formed another exploratory committee to consider running for President of the United States in 2024.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Governor, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you again for making time. You're a national figure, and your insights about what's going on in this country right now will be, I believe, profound for the people up here in this media market. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
So let's get started. Let me start, I guess, with this. You're a New York Times bestselling author, and we've shown our people your latest book, a fascinating read. I loved it, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. It's the book is Republican Rescue: Saving the Party from the Truth Deniers, Conspiracy Theorists, and the Dangerous Policies of Joe Biden. So when I first picked this book up, Governor, the first thing that struck me, it's taken a certain amount of courage for Republican leaders to kind of, I'm not going to say break with former President Trump, but basically to also say, we're going to have to face reality as a party and a future as in our country. This book does that. So talk a little bit about why you wrote that book and what you mean by that.
Well, look, the reason I wrote the book was because I want us to win again. You know, if you don't win, you can't govern. And when the other side does win, they do. And we've seen just in the last almost a year, it's not even a year yet, what they have done to this country in terms of their policies. So winning matters. Right. And we lost the House, the Senate, and the White House in a 2-year period. That's only happened one other time to the Republican Party in our 150-year history. And that was 1930 to 1932 under Herbert Hoover. And the Democrats went on to hold the White House for 28 of the next 36 years. Now, we wouldn't be able to survive that now. So what I wanted to do in writing the book was to say, look, anybody who says they're a supporter of Donald Trump, they get in line behind me. I was the first major elected official in this country to endorse him after I dropped out of the race in 2016. I chaired his transition to the White House. I chaired his opioid and drug abuse commission. I prepared him for the debates in 2016. I prepared him for the debates in 2020. I supported Donald Trump. I voted for him twice. and I helped to try to make his policy successful. But we lost the 2020 election at the presidential level. And there are no facts to support the idea that this election was stolen in any one state, let alone in all the states that it would be needed to change the result of the election. And every minute that we spend talking about what happened before is a minute we're not talking about the dangerous policies of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and what they're trying to do to this country.
Great.
Voters want elections and campaigns to be about tomorrow, not about yesterday. And so the book is trying to lay out why we should forget about yesterday and put it behind us, and why we need to move forward and put forward an agenda that the American people will look at and say, we want that, not what we're getting from Joe Biden right now.
That's a great point, Governor. And as I made reference, having read your book, there are some wonderful, wonderful anecdotes in here, one of which is particularly, I think, appropriate. You tell a story about how Barry Goldwater, prior to the 1964 election, goes down to see the editor of the National Review, William F. Buckley Jr. They meet at the Breakers in Palm Beach. And one of the issues, and I believe the Republican Party is confronting that right now today, it was the John Birch Society back then. But they were radicalized, they were cultish, they were kind of like QAnon. They were not responsible. And they were also hurting the image of what conservatives really are, of patriotic Americans, that they were something other than that. In watching the interplay between Goldwater, who still had to win a convention and still needed some of that support, versus what William F. Buckley was telling him the future of the party had to be, ultimately with the great Ronald Reagan triumph years later. But I see the similarities, Governor. I like your comment, because that's kind of what's going on with the cult of Trump to a degree in the MAGA movement versus what Glenn Youngkin did, for example, in Virginia, which is walk that fine line and win an election. So talk about that.
Well, it's exactly right. Back in 1964, the John Birch Society, which was anti-Semitic and a lot of bad factors about it, had taken a large grip of the Republican Party. William F. Buckley was concerned about it, and he called on two men that he thought could help to break the fever, Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. Right. Barry Goldwater was already a United States Senator, was getting ready to run for president. Ronald Reagan was not in any office at that point, but was someone who had been a leader speaking out for conservative issues across the country. They stood up together, Reagan in the lead, saying that, we're not going to have this. We're not going to be that kind of party. Here's what conservatism is all about. It's about fiscal restraint. It's about economic growth. It's about strength at home and abroad. And he articulated that in such a great way, along with Buckley, that even though Goldwater lost in 1964, it led to a long period of time from 1968 all the way through to 1992, right, when there was only one Democratic president in that entire period of time.
Right.
That's the kind of leadership that we need to provide right now to our party, because listen, the Democrats are even more out of touch today than they were back in the late 60s. The American public rejected that kind of radicalism in the late 60s, and they're going to reject it again if we give them the right vision going forward. So the point of bringing the story into the book was so that people would not be afraid and people would not think that somehow this is an unusual time in our country. This has happened before to our party. We fixed it, and we went on to dominate over the next 24 years. We can do the very same thing if we have the guts to stand up and tell the truth.
Now that we look at what's going on across this landscape, Governor, let's start right now with crime. Now I did a view, because I have an editorial on this Fox network as well, on Larry Krasner, the district attorney of Philadelphia. He makes an announcement about how they don't have lawlessness, they don't have an epidemic of violence in the city. Of course, 521 people have died this past year in murders associated with gun violence, but he carved that out and said, oh yeah, well, the gun violence is bad. Are you kidding me? In other words, if you're shot, that's okay, but all of our other areas aren't so bad. When former Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter came out and completely shamed him, and he then went teary-eyed and apologized, but that sort of thing, Governor, is going on. Crime is going to be an issue for the Republican Party in this country going forward because it's a Democratic issue right now. The progressives that are running the cities, Waukesha, Wisconsin, they let that miscreant Darrell Brooks out 1 week after he tried to run over a woman with the same SUV that he killed people and children in a parade with. And in San Francisco, businesses are shuttered. You have open drug encampments. I talked to you earlier about the Michael Schellenberger book, San Francisco, How Progressives Ruin Cities. Philadelphia is a crime zone right here in this state. I know you're a former federal prosecutor, a U.S. attorney. So let's start with crime and what's going on with the Democrats, that they're now handing out get-out-of-jail-free cards to everybody that they can give them out to.
Oh, look, this is George Soros and his changing through his money of the entire criminal justice system across this country on the elected basis. And he's supporting folks like the DA in Philadelphia, like the DA in Manhattan, in New York City, like the DA in San Francisco and Los Angeles. These folks who say that, there's certain crimes that just don't deserve to be punished anymore. And what's happening? That message gets out there. It demoralizes police, and police don't want to take risks anymore then. And secondly, it encourages the criminal element in our country. You have people just walking into stores and walking out with things and not paying for them. And they're doing it with impunity because they know they're not going to be prosecuted. Look, do we need criminal justice reform in this country too? Of course we do. I did it in New Jersey in a way where we wound up closing 2 state prisons, but crime went down. Why? Because we took the violent criminals and we put them in jail and we kept them there.
Right.
And that's where violent criminals belong. And when you do that, all these other crimes, they don't want to go anywhere near it because they know you're serious and you mean business. And what we need in this country, once again, is someone who knows how to do that, set the tone from a criminal justice perspective so that our streets are safe again. I tell you, I have a daughter who lives in Chicago. I live in fear every day because of the violence in Chicago, and the absolute ineptitude of the mayor and the prosecutor in Chicago is embarrassing.
We have our allies lining up on bended knee to Vladimir Putin to get energy they should be getting from the United States of America. So talk a little bit about the foreign issues that you see as a potential presidential candidate.
Well, look, first and foremost, it's about China. China will be our adversary in the 21st century in the way the Soviet Union was in the second half of the 20th century. And we have to be prepared for that. And we have to be prepared to compete with them and defeat them in every area, educationally, economically, militarily, and from an alliance perspective. And so first and foremost on our minds has to be China, because they're, unlike the Soviet Union, which had a failed economy, the Chinese have a great economy. And so they're an even greater threat, in my view, than the Soviets were in the second half of the 20th century. But we can't forget about the Russians, because, as you said, they are exerting energy blackmail on Europe. They have natural gas. We let them, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, build that pipeline. And now they're holding our allies hostage for energy to keep warm this winter. When the United States has more energy than we know what to do with, yet because of Joe Biden's radical leftist energy policies, we're not allowed to help to do that. That creates a huge problem and an opportunity for Russia that we could take away from them like that.
Right.
With decisive leadership on the energy front.
Right.
Third, we got to think about Iran.
Right.
And the awful deal that the Obama administration, Obama and Biden entered, and that the Trump administration, I think, rightfully got out of. But we have to figure out a way now to help to protect Israel and our other allies in the Middle East who would be threatened by a nuclear-powered Iran. We have to worry about them. And finally, North Korea. Again, now a nuclear power, and somebody who is unstable and who treats his own people with awful, awful violence. Those are all things that should be American concerns, because if they turn on their own people and are acting violent, they will not hesitate to be violent with us as well.
The threat at the Ukraine border from Russia. You've talked about China. You've talked about North Korea. The Biden administration appears to be feckless and tepid. There's no clear leadership. There's no line drawn in the sand to say, here's what's no longer acceptable and we will not accept it. Do you have any idea what their policy is? Because I can't figure it out.
No, and look, remember what Bob Gates said. Bob Gates, who served both Republican and Democratic administrations as CIA director, as Secretary of Defense, he wrote in his book that Joe Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy issue in the last 40 years. Wow. This was Barack Obama's Secretary of Defense.
Right.
Said that for Joe Biden, right? So, no, I have no idea. But what I will tell you is this. I believe this is what happens when you elect a legislator to be president of the United States. They're not forced to make decisions. They don't know how to make hard decisions and to game plan things out like executives do. And Joe Biden is showing his weakness as a decision maker and as a policy maker, because all those years when you're in the Senate, all you have to do is talk. You don't have to prove any results. Now, when he's required to prove results, those results are dire for the United States, and ones that, quite frankly, all of us should be very, very nervous about, because it's making our country weaker. And when that happens, our allies get nervous.
Right.
And our alliances are the things that have kept the world free and America strong in large part over the last 60 years. The American people understand that every week when they go to the gas station, when they go to the supermarket, that everything costs more. And they know that their salaries are not going up at the same pace. Right. They are losing track of their financial security. And, look, this is a hidden tax. Inflation is a hidden tax on the American people because the actions of the government have taken away their money. And so, first thing we need to do is stop this wild, reckless spending and get our fiscal house in order. And let's be honest about this. Republicans did a lousy job of this during the Trump years as well. We did reckless spending during those years as well. Now, the problem for us is whenever we do reckless spending, Democrats do it 3 times larger. And that's what they did. But we did not keep our faith with fiscal conservatism. It matters when we're running up too much debt in this country, and that's what that inflation rate is now showing. And the way it affects people every day is more and more money comes out of their pocket as less and less money is coming in. And then when they have a family emergency, they don't have the savings any longer to be able to fall back on, to be able to protect their family. That's what people are sitting at their kitchen tables worried about tonight. And Joe Biden, he just does this. He has no idea what to do. Right. Not at all. And these policies of his are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren policies that Joe Biden's put his name on. And now we see what a disaster this kind of socialism is across the world, right here at home.
Right. And Governor, we talked a little off camera. Lawrence Summers was the Treasury Secretary under Democratic President Barack Obama. He was warning the Biden administration back in March when they were putting these trillions of the COVID relief money that would have the manifestation it in fact did with inflation. He also warned that ultimately the correction is going to be 2 things. The Fed's going to stop buying assets, which they've already done. And secondly, they're going to have to take up interest rates, which could trigger a recession. How would that be for this country coming out of it? And we're not out of the pandemic yet. If we trigger a recession to combat 40-year high inflation.
Look, it's going to be awful. And because there are many aspects of our society that have not recovered yet from the recession we had during the pandemic. And so you have people who are still trying to dig out of that hole, who have health issues, who have other challenges in their lives. And we should be having a growing, robust, vibrant economy. Instead, we have Joe Biden pumping more and more fake money into the system that ultimately our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to have to pay for. But worse yet, in the near term, this is going to create enormous stress on our economy, and we're going to wind up seeing unemployment go up as well.
Right.
And we do not need to have, remember the misery index. We're old enough to remember the misery index.
Sure.
The combination of inflation and unemployment. We haven't had to worry about that since Ronald Reagan. Right. And now we're going to have to worry about it again. And no surprise, remember, when Joe Biden was asked who his favorite president is, Jimmy Carter. He's looking more and more like Jimmy Carter every day.
Well, all he has to do is put on a sweater, Governor, and talk about a malaise that's affecting the American people in a fireside chat. That'll do it.
Exactly right. And so it's this weakness that where he thinks people want to rely upon government. People don't want to rely upon government. People want to stand up on their own 2 feet, make a living, and keep as much of their own money as they possibly can to support their families in the way they see fit. And this administration just doesn't see it that way.
All right. Well, to talk a little bit about Pennsylvania politics for a second, our governor has been an abject disaster, Tom Wolf. He has just tried to unilaterally put us into RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a catastrophe for Pennsylvania. We're going to have to effectively buy our own gas back from states that have none underneath, which is an amazing thing. And what it's going to do to our economy and the destruction it's wrought is amazing. Again, a democratic, progressive philosophy that is tone deaf for what's going on in the needs of Pennsylvania. Our state is coming out of governor probably the worst 2 years in my lifetime in terms of what it was to what it's become when they shuttered everything. Everything shut down. So,
well, look, Tom Wolf has been an unmitigated disaster as governor of Pennsylvania. And I worked very hard in 2014 for the re-election of Tom Corbett. And think about how much different Pennsylvania would be.
Oh, my
if
God.
Tom Corbett was governor, someone who understands energy policy, someone who understands law and order, someone who understood as governor how to grow the economy. Look, we were in RGGI in New Jersey when I became governor, and I took us out of it.
I know.
We were out of it for 8 years. And you know what we did? We built more natural gas plants during that period of time than any other time in New Jersey history. And why did we do it? We did it because there was gas right across the border in Pennsylvania. And what else did we try to do? We built a couple of pipelines. We got a couple of them stopped, unfortunately, by Barack Obama's federal government. But we knew that we could buy cheap, affordable energy and transport it a very short way from Pennsylvania. The idea that Pennsylvania would enter RGGI is like Saudi Arabia entering RGGI. It's ridiculous. It's unthinkable. Pennsylvania is America's Saudi Arabia in terms of energy supply, and we're going to tie their hands? Crazy. We better get a Republican governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania this year, because if we don't, the economy of Pennsylvania will be in even worse shape than it is today.
Right. Well, Governor, we only have a few minutes left. Talk about what you would like to see happen going forward with the Republican Party. How do we take back this country? How do we fight the cultural war issues? This notion that from critical race theory to indoctrinating our children that we're somehow an immoral country is an anathema to me and many other people. How do we change the cultural wars? Because the difficulty, Governor, is this. Along the great East and West Coast academia, Ivy League establishment, it's all woke and it's all that. So how do we fight back against that? How does the rest of America, the more rural America, fight back?
Well, the way they do it is tell the truth. And that's why it's so important for us to be telling the truth every day going forward. Because believe me, the truth in this case will set us free. We know that the public education system is succeeding for some kids, but failing for a lot of other ones. And we need to provide those parents with an opportunity to choose where to send their children to school and to be involved in what their children learn every day and learn that there are great things about America that they have to know about each and every day. Second, we need to deal with crime on the streets, make people feel safe to leave their homes and to run their businesses. Third, we've got to make sure that our economy is creating jobs again in the private sector, not through government intervention. Fourth, we need to be strong around the world with our alliances. Let's solidify those friendships around the world and let them know they can rely upon America to help them, not to have to turn with a bended knee to Russia or to China. Let's make sure that when we're looking at everything that needs to be done from a crime perspective in this country, that every day what we're doing is making sure that the violent criminals are jailed and that the others are given the opportunity for a second chance. That's what the country needs to be doing. Those are the things we need to be emphasizing. And if the Republican Party emphasizes those things compared to what the Democrats have done in their 1 year in full control, we will win the House in 22. We will win the Senate back. We'll win more governorships, including Pennsylvania, and be on our way to taking the White House back in 24 and be able to restore this country to its place both at home and around the world.
Well, that's a wonderful vision, Governor. I take comfort in the fact that you might be a leader in that transition to 2024 for this country. As I said, you've done great things in your career in public service. And I really want to appreciate, let you know how much I appreciate you taking time as a national figure to come to Northeast and Central Pennsylvania to tell the people what's really going on in this country. Because as you said, it's telling the truth. And you don't hear it on CNN or MSNBC or all the major networks that are controlled and owned by people like Jeff Bezos and others. So thank you so much for your time, Governor. We'll be back to you. I hope you'll come on again.
Listen, I love the Volpe Report. You invite me, I'll be back. And it does a great service for everybody in Northeastern and Central Pennsylvania. That's where real America is. And I'm glad to be on with all of you today.
Thanks, Governor.
A lot of attention has rightly been focused on the immigration crisis at the southern border. It's been spotlighted recently by Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, when the former bussed migrants to Washington, D.C., and the latter flew them to Martha's Vineyard. The response in those communities, though noble, mirrored the problems of their brethren along the southern border. However, the screeching of the progressive media elites, those Democratic left paragons of virtue signaling, was hilarious in its naked hypocrisy. Starting with progressive left New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, who hissed that it was human trafficking and kidnapping. Apparently, the devastation along all of the southern border, due to the incompetence of the Biden administration's open border policy, is of no concern to Dowd. Hysterically, she actually blames American workers, stating, and I quote, "This caper by DeSantis to expose the hypocrisy of Democratic elites shows that migrants simply want to work, which a bunch of Americans don't want to do anymore," end quote. Really? As shameless as that is, even she acknowledged, and I'm quoting, "the criticism that migrants coming across the border have a more severe impact in border states is valid." You think? Quoting, "President Biden ignores the border, giving it to Vice President Harris to get under control. We all know that's not happening," end quote. Fellow New York Times columnist Bret Stephens, a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, had this to say on the immigration crisis. Quote, "It was not an accident of policy. It was an intention. Biden ran for president promising a path to citizenship, raising migrant expectations through the roof, setting off a predictable crisis at the border within a week of his taking office. This is political malpractice on multiple levels. The crisis at the border strains frontline communities. It strains faith in the rule of law. It makes a mockery of the legal immigration system. And it makes a mockery of people like Vice President Harris and others, making fools of themselves by trying to defend a visibly failed policy. The crisis is a failure of liberalism, classic and contemporary. It calls into question the ability or willingness of a Democratic president to solve a basic law and order issue when it conflicts with progressive pieties," end quote. Another Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, historian, and novelist, Theodore H. White, a liberal icon of the 20th century, who identified the progressive dilemma in his novel, In Search of History. He discussed his own break with the School of Liberal Journalism. He states, I quote, "Liberals believe for every complicated problem, there exists both an intellectual and moral solution, and that they coincide," end quote. White found out that theory, prevalent in faculty lounges and publishers' offices, doesn't translate to real life. White was expressing an issue that we all grapple with. We all know how to do what's morally right, and we all know how not to hurt people, but often it's hard to do both things at the same time.